They never expected silence. Not from you. You were the one who always reached out first, always tried to fix things before they shattered, the one who stayed up at night, crafting the perfect words, rehearsing conversations in your head, hoping that this time, maybe this time, they'd finally hear you. You gave them version after version of your truth, softer each time, hoping they'd understand before it was too late. But they never did. They were too busy talking over you, brushing your concerns aside, dismissing your emotions like they were background noise. You with a steady voice in their chaos, the anchor they leaned on when it suited them. But even anchors get tired. You see, you had every reason to yell, to fight, to demand answers, but instead, you went quiet. And that silence, it terrified them, not at first, no. At first, they thought it was another one of your phases, another mood. They assumed you'd come back like you always did, but something was different this time. The silence stretched longer, it got colder, heavier, and when they finally noticed the absence of your voice, it was already too late. You were gone. You didn't write a long goodbye, you didn't slam the door, you didn't leave pieces behind for them to chase. You just stopped showing up. No grand exit, just the kind of disappearance that feels like fog lifting from a mirror, sudden, quiet, complete. And in that stillness, in the emptiness where your voice used to live, they finally realized they had underestimated the storm that comes when a soft heart decides it's had enough. They had mistaken your empathy for dependence, your kindness for weakness, your consistency for permanence. But silence taught them what your words never could, that your presence was a privilege, not a promise. And now, in the echo of everything they never heard when you were still trying, they sit with the realization that the loudest message you ever sent was the one you never spoke. You didn't leave with a bang, you left with dignity, and now your absence lingers like a ghost they can't shake, haunting every room they walk into, not because you wanted to hurt them, but because you finally stopped hurting yourself. They scroll through old texts now, rereading the very messages they once ignored. They replay your voice in their memory, searching for signs they never bothered to see when it mattered. But you're not coming back, and that silence, it says everything they refused to listen to before. There was a time when your voice filled the room, not loudly, not forcefully, but with hope. Hope that maybe this time they'd understand you. You weren't trying to win arguments. You were trying to find peace. You explained your feelings over and over, thinking that clarity might fix what was breaking. You repeated yourself in softer tones, convinced that kindness would get through. But it didn't. They weren't listening, not really. They were just waiting for their turn to speak, to shift the blame, to twist the truth into something that made them feel better about what they did. And when you finally got the courage to be raw, to be honest, they labeled you too much, too intense, too emotional, too everything except right. Every time you spoke, they twisted your words, laughed like your pain was entertainment, mocked your emotions like they were dramatic outbursts instead of cries for connection. You asked for honesty, they gave you games. You asked for effort, they gave you excuses. And through it all, you stayed, not because you were weak, but because you believed in the potential of the bond. You believed in them, even when they didn't believe in you. They called you too sensitive when you reacted, too cold when you withdrew. They questioned your character while benefiting from your loyalty. They told you to calm down, to stop overthinking, when deep down you knew your instincts were right all along. And still, you tried. You kept explaining, kept reaching, kept watering the connection with everything you had left. You gave more than you had, hoping they'd finally notice the effort. But they didn't. They mistook your devotion for desperation. You were the emotional sponge, absorbing their moods, their frustrations, their bad days, while hiding your own. You became their safety net, their sounding board, their free therapist, and every time you tried to speak your truth, they made you feel guilty for having needs, like asking for respect was a burden, like your voice was an inconvenience. They fed off your patience. They relied on your forgiveness, and they drained you without ever once asking if you were okay. It was chaos, wrapped in false calm. It looked stable from the outside, but inside you were screaming in silence, and they never heard it. They never heard you. They just kept taking your time, your empathy, your spirit, until you had nothing left but silence. And when that silence came, it wasn't an accident. It was a result of every ignored word, every dismissed feeling, every invisible tear. You didn't fall silent. You were pushed there, word by word, wound by wound, and they never even noticed. They never realized how hard it was for you to keep smiling in rooms that felt like battlegrounds. They never saw the way your hands shook when you held back tears, how your chest tightened when your truth was once again invalidated. You wanted so badly to be heard, not to win, not to dominate, but to connect, to feel like you mattered. But they made you feel like a problem instead of a person. Every time you tried to speak up, they made you second-guess yourself, gaslighted your memory, dismissed your emotions as exaggeration. They didn't want communication, they wanted control, and every time you questioned the imbalance, they spun the story to make you look unreasonable. You weren't unstable, you were unheard. You weren't dramatic, you were drowning. And still, you stayed. Still, you loved. Because deep down you thought that love could heal what they refused to even acknowledge, that if you just held on tighter, maybe they'd finally see the damage they were causing. But they didn't, and they won't. Because people who talk over your pain never plan to understand it. They expect your strength to be endless, your compassion to be constant, your forgiveness to be automatic. They never imagined that one day the same person they silenced would become silent by choice. But that's what happened. The noise you endured didn't break you. It awakened you. It taught you that being loud doesn't mean being heard, and being silent doesn't mean you've surrendered. Sometimes, silence is the beginning of your escape. There came a moment, subtle yet defining, when you simply stopped explaining. Not because you didn't care anymore, but because you finally realized your words were falling on ears that were never interested in understanding. You saw it in their eyes, heard it in their replies, how your voice became background noise in their narrative. You weren't speaking to connect anymore. You were speaking to defend, to clarify, to prove your worth in a conversation already rigged against you. And that's when you knew. Silence wasn't retreat. It was survival. In a world that thrives on noise, on shouting opinions, reactive comments, on who can out-talk the other, your silence became your loudest rebellion. While they threw accusations, rewrote history, and crafted convenient stories to save face, you chose silence, not to punish, but to protect, not to withhold love, but to preserve dignity, because you understood that every time you defended yourself to someone determined to misunderstand you, you gave away another piece of peace, and you were done bartering with your own soul for a sense of belonging they never planned to offer. They told people you changed, that you became distant, cold, unrecognizable, but what they never admitted was how they pushed you there. They never told the part where they dismissed your feelings like clutter, where they rolled their eyes when you tried to open up, where they mocked your pain with phrases like, "You're too sensitive," or "Here we go again." So you stopped. You stopped explaining why you were hurt. You stopped justifying your tears. You stopped breaking your own heart just to make sure they were comfortable. They thought silence meant guilt, that your quiet was retreat, but silence was your boundary, your peace, your pause from the chaos. It was the moment you stopped participating in your own disrespect, the moment you began choosing calm over conflict, clarity over chaos. You realized you didn't have to argue to be right. You didn't have to raise your voice to be powerful. And you didn't have to prove anything to people who were committed to misunderstanding you. You began to understand that true strength isn't found in screaming your truth at the top of your lungs. It's in whispering it to yourself and walking away. It's in seeing the gaslighting, the manipulation, the shifting of blame, and choosing not to play the game. You learned to let their words fall flat. You watched them try to provoke you, try to bait you into the same arguments, but your silence made them nervous because they couldn't read you anymore, couldn't control you anymore, and that scared them more than any raised voice ever could. You weren't cold, you were cautious. You weren't detached, you were discerning. And every time you chose silence, you chose power. Because silence, in its purest form, isn't emptiness. It's self-respect. It's emotional intelligence. It's your soul saying, "I don't need this energy anymore." And once you tasted that peace, once you felt the weight lift off your chest by simply not engaging, you knew. Silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. In your silence, you heard things more clearly. Your intuition, your truth, your worth. You remembered who you were before they convinced you otherwise. You saw the games for what they were, and you realized they only had power when you participated. So you stopped dancing to their rhythm. You stopped reacting to their chaos. You sat still, and in that stillness, you healed. They don't know what to do with that version of you, the one who doesn't argue, the one who doesn't beg, the one who listens but no longer responds. Because the power they had was never real, it was borrowed from your need to be understood. And now, without that need, they're left talking to their own echoes, while you walk forward in quiet strength, no drama, no announcement, just peace. And that's a language they were never fluent in. And oh, how that silence unnerved them. You didn't slam doors or send angry texts. You didn't post cryptic quotes for attention or seek validation through pity. No, you just became absent. Not physically, always, but energetically. Your attention, your care, your emotional availability, it all disappeared. You no longer gave them access to the parts of you they thought were infinite. And that subtle withdrawal, that absence of response, did what all your words never could. It forced them to sit with their own reflection. They underestimated how powerful your quiet could be. They thought if they kept pushing, you'd eventually explode, give them something dramatic to point at and say, "See, that's why we don't listen." But you never gave them that. You gave them nothing. No more reactions, no more explanations. No more emotional labor to clean up their mess, just space. And in that space, they started hearing their own guilt echo back at them, louder than any scream you could have let out. That's the thing about silence. It doesn't fill the room immediately. It settles in slowly. It lingers. It haunts. It turns discomfort into reflection, and reflection into regret. That's why silence isn't surrender. It's survival. It's strategy. It's the calm assertion that you deserve better. And from that moment on, every quiet step you took forward became a declaration. I will not be broken here. There wasn't a single moment when everything changed. It was a quiet accumulation, a build-up of being overlooked, misheard, mishandled. You gave them the benefit of the doubt more times than you gave it to yourself. You excused their patterns. You rationalized their neglect. But something inside you was evolving with every slight, every eye roll, every sigh when you opened your mouth to express how you felt. Until one day, without announcing it, without even planning it, you simply stopped responding. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't draft a final message or compose a dramatic goodbye. You just stopped explaining, stopped defending, stopped shrinking. Because you finally understood the truth. People only value noise when they're not ready for reflection. And your silence, it became a mirror they couldn't shatter, distort, or look away from. In that silence, they were left alone with the very things they used to deflect with blame. And suddenly, they began to hear what you had been trying to say all along, but this time, through the painful echo of their own actions. This shift wasn't about bitterness. It wasn't a game. It was growth. You weren't walking away to prove something. You were walking away because you finally realized you didn't have to stay. That choosing yourself didn't make you selfish, it made you sane. And what they once labeled as detachment, you began to understand as healing. You weren't becoming colder. You were becoming clearer. You no longer felt the need to react to everything that poked at your peace. You started letting things be, letting go. You were always deep, always caring, always giving. But now, your love had boundaries, your empathy had limits, and your presence, that became earned, not assumed. They used to expect a reply within minutes. Now, hours pass, days, sometimes forever. Not because you want to hurt them, but because you've realized what your silence can teach. You've discovered that absence has a presence too, a loud, undeniable one. And in that space, they began to hear the echo of everything you once tried to communicate, when your voice was being ignored. It was never about revenge. You don't operate in malice. You just stopped volunteering your soul for someone who couldn't even make time to understand your heart. And when they came looking for the old version of you, the one who explained, justified, pleaded, they found only quiet. They found the version of you that listens without needing to reply, sees everything without needing to call it out. That version of you doesn't yell anymore, doesn't chase, doesn't correct the record. That version simply moves on. And they noticed. Oh, they noticed. They started sensing the absence before they even saw it. Your silence was too loud to ignore. Their mind wandered at night. Why haven't they texted? Did I go too far? Do they even care anymore? But the truth was, you cared for too long. And now, you care differently. By protecting your peace. You realized that being reactive kept you tangled in their chaos, but removing yourself, that brought clarity. That brought elevation. It was the final transformation. From someone who used to absorb every bit of emotional shrapnel they threw, to someone who simply walked away from the battlefield. Not because you lost, but because you outgrew the war. Your silence wasn't defeat. It was a declaration that you're done bleeding for people who never learned how to stop cutting. You didn't just change, you evolved. And in that evolution, they were forced to face the one thing they spent so long avoiding, themselves. That's the shift. From reaction to removal, from explaining to exiting, from being the glue to becoming the ghost. And while they still talk, still spin their version of the story, you're no longer there to correct it. Because the truth doesn't need a defense when your absence says everything. And now they sit in rooms full of people, surrounded by distractions, yet haunted by a silence they didn't expect would hit so hard. Because when you stop reacting, you stop feeding the fire. You stop playing the role they cast you in, the over-explainer, the empath, the fixer. And when that character disappears, they're left on a stage with no applause, no audience, and no lines left to say. They underestimated your stillness. They never imagined that the person who used to overthink every word would now go hours, days, even weeks without offering a single sentence. And that, the void, became unbearable. They thought you needed the last word. But the real power was always in your ability to walk away without saying a single one. Because words can be twisted, but silence becomes their conscience. It becomes the uninvited guest in every quiet moment. That awkward pause in conversation, that 2 a.m. thought spiral, that sharp sting when they hear your name and realize you're not coming back, not because you hate them, but because you finally love yourself more. This shift, this transformation, wasn't just about creating space. It was about reclaiming your identity. The version of you that no longer gives explanations is the version that finally understands their worth. You didn't disappear to teach them a lesson. You disappeared to finally attend your own. And in that learning, in that stillness, you found what you were always giving away: peace, clarity, and power. And that, above all, is the most beautiful kind of change. The one that doesn't announce itself, but changes everything in its quiet wake. You became your own sanctuary, your own closure, your own rescue mission. And that's a power no one can take away or distort with their narrative. It wasn't stormy when you left. The sky didn't crack open. The world didn't stop spinning. In fact, everything was eerily quiet. You didn't slam the door or write a goodbye letter. No long paragraphs explaining what they already knew. You just left. Your bags weren't thrown together in chaos. They were packed carefully, methodically, as if each item placed inside was a part of your healing. No drama, no scenes, just silence and motion. That was the day you chose yourself, and you did it with a calm they never thought you were capable of. It was the kind of quiet that unsettled the air. Your phone didn't light up until hours later. Missed calls, half-written texts, voice messages stammering out, "Where are you?" But by then it was too late. Because you were already gone, not just in distance, but in spirit. They walked through the house in disbelief, like your absence had changed the shape of the air, like the walls themselves were mourning. Their chaos had nothing left to bounce off of, no reaction to draw from, no emotional anchor to keep them steady. They scrolled through old messages trying to find signs. Maybe you had hinted, maybe you had said it in between the lines. But the truth is, they weren't listening. Not really. They heard your voice, but they never truly listened to the pain behind your calm. And now that your voice is gone, it echoes louder than any scream. That's what haunts them, the silence you left behind, the untouched glass on the table, the final load of laundry you folded, the scent of you still lingering in the hallway. You became a ghost with a heartbeat, visible only in the spaces they once took for granted. They underestimated how powerful enough could be. Thought that as long as they avoided final explosions, you'd stay. That loyalty meant permanence, not choice. But your silence that day, that was your answer. That was the final act in a story you had rewritten too many times. And while they stood there, fumbling for explanations, you walked out with peace. Not because it didn't hurt, but because staying had started to hurt more than leaving ever could. The irony, they always said you were too quiet, that you didn't fight back, that you didn't communicate. But now they crave the very silence they used to resent. They replay the last moment you were in the room like a broken loop, wondering if there was a sign, a look, a shift in your energy they missed. But there wasn't, because you didn't owe them closure. Not after the 100 chances you gave them, the 100 nights you cried yourself to sleep, waiting for them to notice, the 100 mornings you woke up, still choosing them, despite how they made you feel. Their confusion was loud. Their questions were frantic, but your absence was louder. It filled the space between their sentences. It disrupted their rhythm. It humbled their ego. You weren't supposed to leave, not them. But you did. Without slamming doors, without shouting matches, you simply walked away, and in doing so you broke a cycle that had kept you small for far too long. And now they sit in the same rooms you once lit up, feeling the coldness of your absence. It's not just that you're gone, it's how you left, with grace, with finality, without seeking validation. You didn't wait for a reaction, didn't pause for an apology. You just moved, and that motion, that unapologetic step forward, became the moment they finally understood. You weren't bluffing, you weren't dramatic, you were done. They call it silence, but for you, it was freedom. Days passed and your name became the loudest silence they ever heard, not because you said anything, but because you no longer did. Every time their phone buzzed, they hoped it was you, but it never was. You had unplugged from the version of them that never deserved your access in the first place. The version that took and only realized they should have given something back once you stopped showing up. That's when they began to understand the weight of your presence, because now they were suffocating in its absence. They'd scroll through your old messages, rereading them like scripture. Suddenly, every word felt different, like a warning they missed, like a prophecy fulfilled. They'd stare at your last scene, try to decode your silence like it was some cryptic poem. But the truth was never hidden. You told them who you were, what you needed, what was hurting. They just didn't want to hear it. And now, your distance was no longer metaphorical. It was physical. It was undeniable. You weren't there to forgive again. You weren't there to ask for what should have been given freely. Sometimes they'd reach for their phone late at night, halfway through typing "I miss you" before deleting it. Pride still had them in a chokehold. But not you. You had walked away from pride, from pain, from needing to be needed, and you had finally seen what they never did, yourself. The real you. The version of you that didn't have to earn love by sacrificing yourself. The version that didn't have to beg for respect or for space to breathe. And that's what stung the most. Not your departure, but your transformation. Because they knew deep down they didn't just lose someone. They lost someone who would have stood by them through storms. Someone who stayed long after the love had dried up, hoping it would rain again. They lost that faith, that light, that you. And you gained something in return. Peace that no longer had to be defended. Joy that didn't come with terms and conditions. And silence, rich, sacred silence, that held more meaning than any conversation you ever had with them. The day you left wasn't the end of your story. It was the beginning of theirs. A story written in regret, in late-night realizations, in unanswered calls and unopened messages. Meanwhile, your story was unfolding somewhere else, quieter, stronger, and finally free. Because when you left, you didn't just leave a house, a name, or a title behind. You left a version of yourself they'll never meet again. And that, more than anything, is what they'll regret forever. It didn't hit them all at once. No, regret is never that merciful. It crept in slowly, like a whisper echoing through the hallways of their mind. At first it was just silence. The kind of silence that feels oddly unfamiliar, like a song suddenly cut short. They tried to brush it off. Maybe you were just busy. Maybe you'd reach out first. That was the first lie they told themselves. But then days passed, then weeks, and the silence stopped being a gap. It became a weight. Every corner of their world now carries your absence. The chair you used to sit in, the cup of coffee they'd always pour for you without thinking, the inside jokes that now hang in the air without a response. You see, your absence didn't just leave a space, it rewrote the entire atmosphere. They wake up and check their phone, out of habit, still expecting your name to light up their screen. But it never does. And each time it doesn't, it burns. At first, they were angry. Not at you, at the silence, at the mirror, at themselves. They couldn't believe you really left. They told themselves you were bluffing, that you were being dramatic. But they knew deep down, the moment you stopped arguing, stopped asking to be seen, that was the beginning of the end. You didn't slam doors. You didn't scream. You didn't threaten. You just got quiet. And that silence is now their punishment. They sit with your ghost in every room. They scroll through old conversations, trying to find where it all shifted, rereading the words you once begged them to understand, the messages where you poured yourself out, hoping they'd catch even a glimpse of your breaking point. They didn't. They ignored the red flags, took your loyalty as a guarantee, assumed you'd always be there, no matter how many times they failed to show up for you. And now they're haunted by everything they didn't say, by every laugh they brushed off, by every tear they didn't ask about. It replays in their head like an unskippable loop. Your kindness, your efforts, the way you kept choosing them long after they stopped deserving it. And it's not just regret they're feeling, it's guilt. Heavy, unrelenting guilt. The kind that keeps you up at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling, asking questions that only echo back shame. They've started seeing you in people who aren't you, started hearing your name in songs that were once just background noise. You became a presence in your absence. You became louder in silence than you ever were in words. They hear your silence in the pauses of their conversations, in the stillness between laughs, in the hollow space left behind after fake connections. That's the cost of underestimating someone real. They thought you'd break, but instead you disappeared. And now all the noise they surrounded themselves with can't drown out the memory of you. Because you weren't just a person in their life. You were a mirror. You showed them their best self, even when they didn't deserve it. You reminded them of who they wanted to be. And when you left, that reflection vanished. They're starting to realize the truth, that silence isn't passive. It's a statement, a message louder than any scream. Your absence became their teacher, and now they're finally listening. But it's too late. The conversations they avoided now haunt them. The apologies they never made now echo like unfinished sentences. And they don't know how to reach you anymore, not just physically, but emotionally. Because the bridge they burned was built on your patience, and that patience is gone. Now they're feeling everything you once felt. Confusion, loneliness, the ache of being misunderstood. Except this time, there's no one there to catch them, no one checking in, no one forgiving them without asking for it. They're left to sit in the ruins of their own neglect, to taste the bitterness of a silence they never prepared for. They miss you, not just the presence, but the peace you brought, the stability, the grace, the way you made chaos feel calm. They didn't just lose a person, They lost a sanctuary. They didn't believe you'd leave. That's the part that breaks them most. They were so sure you'd always be there, heart open, door unlocked, ready to explain yourself one more time. But you didn't. You left without fireworks, without warning. And that absence, that's the loudest thing they've ever heard. They try to fill the space with others. New voices, new conversations, distractions masked as healing. But nothing fits. No connection feels the same. No laugh hits as deep. No comfort is as effortless. Because you weren't just a person, they've come to realize you were home. And now every place they go feels like exile. Their world hasn't just become quieter, it's colder, dimmer. They keep turning corners, expecting to find some trace of you, but all they find is emptiness. Their friends tell them to move on, to forget, to just give it time. But time doesn't erase real, it amplifies it. Each passing day is a reminder, not of what they lost, but of what they could have had, if only they'd listened, shown up, cared a little more. And they carry that regret like a shadow. You were the chapter they didn't finish reading, and now they're flipping through pages that will never be written. And what's worse is they know you're not coming back. Not because you're cruel, but because you've grown. You've built a new life in the silence, one that doesn't require explanation or apology. You've created peace where there used to be pain. While they're trapped in loops, you're writing new beginnings. And that contrast, that's what hurts the most. You didn't need to change them. You just changed yourself. And now, they have no access to who you've become. They look at your growth from afar. Every step forward you take without them is a bruise to their ego, a lesson to their pride. Because while they stayed comfortable, you evolved. While they hesitated, you healed. You rose in the very silence they tried to use against you, and now they understand. That wasn't weakness, that was strategy. That was strength. They whisper your name in rooms where your silence still lingers. They talk about you like a ghost story, someone who used to be real, someone they can't forget. But they never tell the whole truth. They won't admit that they had a good thing and lost it by trying to mute the very soul that loved them the loudest in silence. They wonder what would have happened if they had just listened, if they'd held on tighter, if they'd recognized the weight of your love before it became the burden of their memory. But they didn't, and now all they have are echoes, and maybe that's the cruelest part, knowing you didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because they never started. And now your absence is their forever unanswered question. And you never looked back. They thought your silence meant defeat, that walking away without fanfare meant you were lost. But they never understood the power in disappearing to rebuild. What you gained in the distance was never just space, it was clarity. The noise faded, and suddenly you could hear yourself again. Not the broken voice that used to beg to be heard, but the one buried beneath all the compromise, the pain, the constant shrinking to fit into spaces that were never built for you. In that stillness you found your center, not by accident, but by choosing yourself every single day, even when it hurt. Your mornings became slower, your thoughts quieter, more deliberate. You started drinking your coffee without checking your phone. You smiled in the mirror, not because someone told you to, but because you finally recognized the strength behind your own eyes. Your glow-up wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, spiritual. The scars remained, yes, but now they shimmered like gold veins in broken pottery, not flaws but proof. Proof you survived, proof you transformed. They used to make you feel like being sensitive was a burden. Now it's your compass. And what you discovered was simple, yet life-altering. Peace isn't loud. It's not applause. It's not validation from people who only loved the version of you that served their comfort. It's a Sunday morning with no urgency. It's choosing yourself without explanation. It's walking past the same places that once held you hostage and feeling nothing but freedom. You didn't just leave them behind. You left the narrative behind. The idea that you needed their approval, their presence, their closure to move forward. You burned the old blueprint and began designing a life with your peace at the center. You became your own closure, your own comfort. You stopped needing people to understand your worth because you finally understood it yourself. Every part of you that once ached for acknowledgement was now satisfied by solitude. And in that solitude you started building, not walls, but boundaries, not cages, but clarity. You didn't just grow, you evolved. Slowly, you picked up the pieces of your identity and shaped them into something unshakable. And now your silence speaks volumes. Not the kind that begs to be heard, but the kind that says, I don't owe you anything. I owe myself everything. Your routine changed, not just how you spent your time, but why. You no longer entertained small talk or half-hearted conversations. You started reading again, writing again, dreaming again. You made plans, not around others' availability, but your peace. Your energy became precious, protected, sacred. What once drained you, you now walked away from without hesitation. And that strength, it didn't come. You became the person you always needed, when you were drowning in noise, when you were loving too loudly, when you were giving until it hurt. You finally held your own hand, whispered your own name, looked in the mirror, and said, I got you now. That's what they don't see, that it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about finally proving yourself right, that you are, and always were, enough. And now, you rise in rooms they can't even enter, not because they're locked out, but because they were never meant to come. Your glow isn't a show, it's a state of being. You love quieter now, but deeper. You dream slower now, but clearer. You don't need to broadcast your healing. It radiates. Your peace travels before you enter a room, and the real ones feel it. The ones who deserve you now walk beside you, not in front, not behind. You are no longer explaining your worth. You're embodying it. You're no longer addicted to potential, no longer waiting for someone to choose you. You've become the one who chooses. You've redefined what it means to be strong, not hard, not unbreakable, but whole. Because being whole means you can break and still return to yourself. And you did. You came back to yourself. That's your win. That's your power. So let them wonder. Let them sit with their assumptions. While they chase noise, you found music in the quiet. While they seek validation, you found self-respect. While they scroll endlessly for something real, you're living it, breathing it, becoming it. They thought you were silent because you had nothing to say. But now they know. You were silent because your peace said it all. And the beauty of it all, you don't miss them. You don't need them to feel whole. You don't replay old conversations hoping for different endings. You write new stories now, ones where you are not background noise, but the main character. You laugh from the belly, Cry without shame. You're no longer trying to be understood. You're being, fully, unapologetically, gloriously. Your presence now feels different, even to yourself. You no longer walk into rooms hoping to be seen. You walk in knowing you belong. That internal shift changed everything. The way you carry yourself, the way you speak with calm certainty, the way you no longer rush to fill silence because now you understand that silence can be sacred. You learned how to rest without guilt, how to succeed without seeking validation, how to love yourself even when no one is watching. There's something in your energy now that can't be faked. Something in your laugh that sounds like freedom. Something in your stillness that feels like strength. You are no longer held together by the approval of others. You're held together by your own truth. And that truth, it's beautiful, it's powerful, it's quiet, but commanding. This journey wasn't easy. You cried, you questioned, you wanted to go back. But every time you thought about returning, you remembered the cost. You remembered how it felt to be unseen, unheard, unloved, while giving everything. And that memory kept you moving forward, toward something better, toward yourself. And now, your peace is not just survival, it's your superpower, shining louder than any goodbye ever could. Finally. They used to laugh when you spoke from your heart, roll their eyes when you showed too much emotion, call you too deep, too much, too intense, like feeling things deeply was some kind of flaw. They mocked your sincerity, downplayed your kindness, treated your loyalty like it was a leash they could tug whenever they wanted attention. But now they sit in silence, staring at old conversations they once brushed off, scrolling through memories they never valued when they had the chance, reading your messages like scripture, holding on to digital words like lifelines. The same messages they once ignored. Now, they reread them at midnight, wondering how they ever had someone who loved them so unconditionally and let it slip away so carelessly. You were their safe place, the calm in their chaos. But they only realize it now as they scroll through faces that don't smile like you did, voices that don't calm like yours did, eyes that don't see through them like you once did, effortlessly. They've tried moving on, tried replacing what you brought with temporary thrills, shallow conversations, performative love. But nothing fits. No one measures up. Because the depth you gave, it wasn't just rare, it was irreplaceable. Now they romanticize everything they took for granted. The little texts, the 2 a.m. check-ins, the way you remembered their bad days better than they did. The sound of your laughter echoing from the kitchen. The smell of your hoodie that still lives somewhere deep in their closet. They hold it like a relic now, sacred, untouchable, something that once was theirs and will never be again. Your name is a bruise they carry beneath their skin, tender and constant, and they'll never say it out loud, but it sits with them in every quiet room. You became the standard. Not out of ego, not out of pride, but because you were the realest thing they ever knew. And now every connection they attempt feels like cardboard compared to what you gave so freely. They find themselves searching for your kindness in strangers, hoping for your warmth in colder hearts, wishing someone, anyone, would see them the way you did, even when they didn't deserve it. But that kind of love only knocks once, and they slammed the door on it. They tell themselves stories to sleep at night, that it was mutual, that it was timing, that you were too sensitive, too difficult, too clingy, but deep down, they know. They know they fumbled the rarest soul they'll ever cross paths with, and what stings even more is the silence. The lack of a final fight, no explosion, just absence. You disappeared, like a star going supernova, leaving light, warmth, memory, and a darkness they can't shake. Now when someone asks about you, they pretend not to care. They say, "We just grew apart," or "It wasn't meant to be." But inside they're screaming with the weight of everything unsaid. Every moment they ignored you. Every time they chose ego over empathy. Every time they left you guessing, waiting, hurting in silence, while they sought attention elsewhere. That's the weight they carry now, quietly, constantly. You haunt them, not in bitterness, not in vengeance, but in memory. In the realization that they had someone who would have moved mountains, and instead they complained about the weather. They don't miss the version of you that begged. They miss the version that stayed long after they gave you every reason to leave. The version that showed up. The version that forgave over and over until it broke you. And now they finally whisper it into the emptiness. You were right. They never saw the shift happen. It wasn't sudden. It was 1,000 quiet moments stacking into a decision. A decision you made, not with rage, but with resolve. While they laughed, you were grieving. While they dismissed your pain, you were memorizing the exact shape of your hurt. And by the time they noticed you were different, it was already too late. You weren't the same anymore. You didn't respond with softness anymore. You didn't reach out anymore. You didn't care to fix what they were so busy breaking. They used to take your presence for granted. Now, they feel the absence like a shadow following them everywhere. Now, every achievement of yours, every post, every smile they see from afar, it shakes something in them. Not jealousy, not resentment, but regret. A gut-deep knowing that they could have stood beside you, been a part of your evolution. But instead, they became the reason for it. You rose, not because they supported you, but because they broke you, and you built yourself back stronger. Their ghost lives in your silence, and your silence screams louder than any "I told you so" ever could. They'll never tell anyone how often they still think of you, how your name still stings like a wound they don't let scab, how they measure every new connection against the depth you carried in your silence, your patience, your presence. You became the storm they claimed they could handle, but ended up drowning in. And now, they're left navigating a world that no longer includes you, while pretending they're fine. But every birthday they don't get to text you, every milestone they can't share, every song that reminds them of your energy, they break a little more. You weren't just a phase, you were the real thing. And the harshest truth, they'll never find another you. And deep down, they know it. They'll whisper you were right, only in their minds, because pride won't let it reach their lips. But you don't need to hear it. Their silence confirms it. Their absence proves it. And as they sit with the weight of everything they lost, you'll keep rising, lighter, louder in your quiet, unshaken, and finally, free. Because the greatest revenge was never revenge at all. It was the peace they'll never taste again, completely, unapologetically, gone. You didn't scream. You didn't beg. You didn't launch a campaign to prove your worth or tear them down to lift yourself up. You just got quiet, dead silent. And that was your move. While they expected anger, expected a breakdown, expected you to chase them one last time, you gave them the one thing they never anticipated, Complete absence. Not just physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. You didn't just leave their life, you left their mind. The energy you used to pour into explaining yourself, into holding the relationship together, into fixing what was never yours to fix. You took it all back, every ounce of it. And in doing so, you sent a message they'll never forget. The most poetic part? Your silence spoke volumes. It echoed in places your voice could never reach. They used to ignore you mid-sentence. Now they're haunted by the words you never said. They replay the last look in your eyes, searching for meaning. They remember how your energy shifted, how your patience became distance, how your kindness turned into calm indifference. You didn't tell them you were done. You showed them, and that was more powerful than any fight could have been. They expected a war. What they got was retreat, and it cut deeper. Because wars end with winners and losers. But silence. Silence ends with reflection, with shame, with the deafening realization that they were never in control. You were. The one who knew how to leave without theatrics. To choose peace over performance. And that's what stings the most now. They didn't just lose someone. They lost someone who knew exactly when to leave and did it with class. You didn't leave a mess. No parting shots. No emotional explosions. Just stillness. You took your pain and carried it out like something sacred, refusing to let them see what they caused. You chose growth over revenge, peace over being right. And in that, you won, not just the situation, but yourself. Your silence became your legacy. Your peace became your power. Now every room you once filled with warmth feels colder without your presence. The people who shrugged you off now lean in when your name comes up, wondering if anyone knows where you went. They check your social media with fake indifference, hoping for a glimpse, a post, a sign that you're still watching, still reachable. But all they find is distance. A new version of you they no longer recognize. One that doesn't beg for crumbs. One that doesn't explain, doesn't apologize, doesn't lower itself just to be seen. They underestimated what you were building in that silence. They mistook your stillness for surrender. What they didn't realize was that in the quiet, you were rebuilding, recalibrating, becoming more of yourself than ever before. They thought they broke you, but they only cracked open your potential. And from those fractures came fire, strength, vision, grace. You walked away without fanfare, but the aftershock still being felt. It's in their doubt, their late-night questions, their reruns of conversations you already forgot. It's in the way they see your glow from afar and realize they are no longer welcome. They thought silence meant defeat, but your silence was your sword. It was precision. It was discipline. It was the final act in a story you'd outgrown. You didn't just win, you evolved. And that kind of victory, it echoes forever. Not because it's loud, but because it's real. They'll remember it every time they walk into a room that feels a little too empty. Every time they hear your name and feel a tightening in their chest. Every time they realize the only closure they'll ever get is the one you never gave them. And now they don't remember what you said. They remember what you didn't. They don't quote your arguments. They quote your absence. You became the turning point in their story, the moment where everything real slipped away. And no apology, no gesture, no explanation can fix what their neglect broke. Because silence isn't just the absence of sound. It's the presence of self-respect, of boundaries, of wisdom. And your silence? It's a monument now. A symbol of the day you stopped allowing yourself to be hurt and started protecting your peace. They'll try to fill the void with noise, with people, with distractions. But none of it will sound like peace. None of it will feel like you. You were the anchor, the calm, the constant. And now they're adrift in their own chaos, forced to face the truth they avoided for so long, that kindness was never weakness, that silence was never surrender, that the quiet ones don't lose, they just leave with grace and never look back. You didn't leave to punish them. That was never your nature. You left because staying was starting to cost you your peace, your identity, your soul. You were slowly dissolving, piece by piece, trying to hold on to something that never held you back with the same strength. But the irony? The moment you stopped trying, the moment you chose yourself, it hurt them more than any confrontation ever could. You never raised your voice. You never threw their mistakes in their face. You just stopped explaining, stopped showing up, stopped being available to people who only noticed your presence when it was gone. And they felt it. Oh, did they feel it? Not in a loud, dramatic way, but in the quiet stillness that followed your absence. In the empty inbox that used to light up with your check-ins. In the silence where your laughter used to echo. In the way your name became a ghost in rooms where you once lit up every corner. You weren't just a person in their life. You were a presence, a light, a mirror. And when you left, they lost far more than they admitted. You gave everything. And in the end, the most powerful thing you gave was your silence. Because your silence wasn't empty. It was full of truths they refused to hear. Every second of that quiet was a reminder. You were never weak for staying, but they were foolish for thinking you would never leave. They didn't believe you had it in you, but you did, and when you finally walked, you didn't need to slam the door. The sound of it closing gently was enough to shake their entire foundation. Your absence became the loudest truth. The truth that couldn't be ignored, spun, or manipulated. It was the kind that echoed in their empty spaces, the kind that whispered in between conversations with others who could never hold a candle to you. You see, they thought your loyalty was endless, that no matter what they did, you'd still be there. Explaining, forgiving, patching up the mess. But you weren't infinite, you were human, and you finally hit a point where the silence felt safer than the connection. And even now they try to pretend they're unaffected. They put on performances of indifference, play their roles as if nothing happened. But behind closed doors, your absence is a shadow in every moment of stillness. It visits them in the quiet, when the noise dies down and they're forced to confront the truth. They lost someone who was willing to love them at their lowest. Not because you were weak, but because you were strong enough to hold both their brokenness and your own, until you couldn't anymore. You didn't need them to say, "I'm sorry." You didn't need them to say, "You were right." The silence told you everything. Their actions, or lack of them, revealed the truth you had been trying so hard not to see. And now Now they sit with what they created, a space where your love used to live, a silence that screams, a mirror that won't look away. That's how the story ends. Not with revenge, not with rage, but with distance, with peace. You walked away with your head high, your heart healing, your spirit intact. They'll carry the weight of that loss far longer than you ever carried the pain they gave you. And in that, there's your closure. Not spoken, just lived, just felt, just earned. And in the quiet that follows, they'll relive every moment they took you for granted, again and again. That's not your burden anymore. That's their consequence, one they'll feel forever.